In 1933, RKO Pictures released one of the most iconic films of all time, King Kong.
We're millionaires, boys! I'll share it with all of you! Why, in a few months it'll be up in lights on Broadway! Kong! The eighth wonder of the world!
The film was the triumph of director Ernest P. Schoedsack, producer Marion C. Cooper, and stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien. King Kong was unlike anything the world had ever seen before, making it an immediate success, and it is widely considered the greatest giant monster film of all time.
Wild, weird, wonderful, the stuff for which movies were made. Adventure, to make you wonder if it's true, while your eyes convince you that it is. Truly, the thrill of thrills. Don't miss it this time.
With the film's giant success, RKO immediately greenlit a sequel called Son of Kong. The film was rushed into production and released that same year.
Skipper, believe it or not, there's a little Kong. What? A little... How little?
Unlike its predecessor, Son of Kong has largely been forgotten and is considered by many as a simple cash grab by RKO. Kong would go on to become a seminal piece of pop culture, often being parodied in other movies and shows, as well as becoming a merchandising juggernaut.
If you've been looking high and low for a big car as good as a Volkswagen, maybe you should look into our big car, the Volkswagen 411. It has some things no Volkswagen ever had, like 4 big doors and lots of room and luxury for the whole family. It has some advanced things most cars don't have, like electronic fuel injection, an automatic preheating system, and a big trunk up front. But you don't have to be a genius to drive the 411, because it comes with an automatic transmission, also as standard equipment. So now, there's a Volkswagen big enough for just about everyone. The Volkswagen 411 4-door sedan.
15 years later, the trio of Ernest B. Schoedsack, Marion C. Cooper, and Willis O'Brien reunited for an original story similar to Kong called Mighty Joe Young.
The kind of movie you're waiting to see as John Ford and Marion C. Cooper present Mighty Joe Young, whose sensational exploits will startle you, thrill you, electrify you with hair-raising excitement and suspense. See Mighty Joe Young as he savagely resists capture in his native Africa.
Joe!
See the most fantastic relationship between beast and beauty, a mere girl mastering a primitive giant. See Mighty Joe Young, enraged by Hollywood pranksters, destroy Filmland's swankiest nightclub on the fabulous Sunset Strip.
Mighty Joe Young, the picture that's alive with the most sensational action thrills ever filmed. Mightier than King Kong, Mighty Joe Young.
Mighty Joe Young would go on to become iconic in its own right, and is considered by many as a worthy successor to King Kong. But the most notable aspect of Mighty Joe Young is that it was the big screen debut of the genre's most notable, iconic, and beloved figure, stop-motion animator Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen would go on to do the effects of one of the most beloved films of the genre, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Based on a story by Ray Bradbury, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was a massive success, mainly due to the incredible effects work by Harryhausen, who despite the film's incredibly low budget, was able to push the boundaries of what you could do with stop motion. With the film's success, the real horrors of war, and the beginning of the atomic age, the 1950s saw a change in the films that would be produced by Hollywood studios. The regular horror and suspense films were pushed aside in favor of more fantastical science fiction-based stories in order to thrill audiences. Many of these included science experiments gone awry, alien invasions, and of course, giant monsters. One of the most notable films of this era was the 1954 film, Them. Unlike the stop-motion effects of King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, the giant ants of Them were brought to life using large, animatronic puppets.
We may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true, and there shall be destruction and darkness come up in creation, and the beast shall reign over the earth.
Yes, the earth, the skies above and the seas below, infested by swarms of nightmare creatures, crueler, deadlier than the armored giants of prehistoric eras. Here is a wild, headlong flight into terror, as the desert erupts with the grim battle for survival. Here is a fear-frenzied moment of suspense, as mankind totters before a thing that multiplies faster than it can be killed. Here is a desperate plunge into the black depths of the earth, where human courage challenges the brute force, the slashing jaws, the poison fangs that guard the subterranean nest where the beast spawns its terrible progeny.
To all units, condition red. Drain 267 is the target area. Repeat, condition red. Drain 267 is the target area.
Gas we could use?
No, we can't take a chance. It might poison the whole city.
But Hollywood were not the only ones creating these destructive beasts of mayhem. That same year in Japan, Toho Studios gave birth to the most notable and recognizable giant monster. They called it Gojira, aka Godzilla. Instead of stop motion and animatronics, Toho would use its own effects method. Godzilla was portrayed by a man in a rubber suit stomping around a carefully crafted miniature city. The film itself was much darker in tone to its Hollywood counterparts. Many of the cast and crew members had experienced the devastations of war firsthand and used their experiences as a point of inspiration on how to depict the film's graphic destruction. Godzilla proved that these films could be more than just spectacle. The following year, Toho released a sequel called Godzilla Raids Again, which featured Godzilla battling against another monster named Anguirus. In 1956, Toho's Godzilla finally made its way to US shores. In an attempt to make the film more marketable for American audiences, the film was given a new title, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. The film was also recut, incorporating additional scenes starring famed actor Raymond Burr.
A prehistoric monster the Japanese call Godzilla has just walked out of Tokyo Bay. He's as tall as a 30-story building. Now he's making his way toward the city's main line of defense. 300,000 volts of electricity strung around the city is a barrier. A barrier against Godzilla.
For the next few years, Toho began focusing on other original monsters, such as Rodan, Varan, and a giant butterfly named Mothra. Meanwhile, back in Hollywood, Ray Harryhausen cooked up his next magnificent effects creation, in It Came from Beneath the Sea.
A tidal wave of terror engulfs the screen as a raging monster from the dawn of creation attacks the world of man.
In order to save time and money, Harryhausen gave the film's giant octopus 6 legs instead of 8. At the time, nobody noticed.
The H-bomb blasted it loose from the depths of the Pacific, but not even the H-bomb can kill it.
Unknown object coming this way. Entering minefield. Stand by, number 38, mine. Fire. Go up. Ready, number 12, south. Fire. Coming on through.
That's the end of our first line of defense, Miss Joyce.
Then the red alert.
West Coast reels under Holocaust as the men and weapons of the atomic age battle to the death against the ageless monster of the deep.
The film is also notable in that it was the first time that Harryhausen worked with producer Charles H. Schneer, who would later go on to produce all of Harryhausen's later works. For the 1955 film Tarantula, the filmmakers primarily used an actual, real-life tarantula, enlarged on screen to appear giant.
What if circumstances were to magnify one of them in size and strength, took it out of its primitive world and turned it loose in ours?
Then expect something that's fiercer, more cruel and deadly than anything that ever walked the earth.
Even science was stunned. The new atomic miracle should have been mankind's greatest boon. Instead, when such power to cause phenomenal growth proved dangerously unstable, man was confronted with his most shocking blunder.
The isotope triggered our nutrient into a nightmare.
A blunder that transformed a tiny insect into the 100-foot spider that was now ravaging the panic-stricken countryside.
Steady.
With the success of Tarantula, Universal began producing more of these enlarged creature features, one of which was the 1957 film The Land Unknown.
Could man have survived in the dinosaur age of mighty monsters? Shudder at history's most ferocious killer, Tyrannosaurus Rex. The battle of the great Stegosauri. Huge carnivorous man-eating plants. The incredible water monster, Elasmosaurus.
Oh, we'll never get out of here, Alan. Never, never, never.
Stop it, do you hear me? Stop it. This doesn't sound like you. We're not lit yet.
That's how I rule.
Where's the wreck? Talk!
You're gonna rot here.
That same year, Ray Harryhausen returned to the genre, this time with an original story of his own.
The airship XY-21, which crashed into the Mediterranean Sea on the 11th, was a single-stage, astral-propelled rocket launched 13 months ago from a site within the United States. The rocket, with its complement of 17 men, had landed on the planet Venus.
Venus?
The planet Venus?
Some of you may also have heard the story of a monster now confined here in Rome Zoo. That beast is from Venus.
Now for those electric cables. Misericordia!
Power's low.
Tired of destroying American cities, Harryhausen decided to set the film in Europe, with the finale featuring the film's monster, the Emir, climbing the Roman Colosseum. Harryhausen's unique design of the Emir has made it one of the most recognizable and beloved of his many creations. Following the film's success, Harryhausen decided his next film would be based on a character from Mid-Eastern mythology, which in his mind was the ultimate personifier of adventure and the perfect excuse for a story featuring various fantasy creatures to create.
She was once a beautiful princess. The sadistic magician shrinks her to the size of a tiny doll. And now, Sinbad must do the impossible to save her. He must destroy a legion of hell-spawned monsters on the death-shrouded island of Colossa. See the flashing death of the living skeleton. See the attack of the giant two-headed bird. See the dance of the Cobra Woman and feel her deadly slithering embrace. See the spectacular battle between the one-eyed Cyclops and the fire-breathing dragon. The incredible magic of Dynarama recreates the enchanted, breathtaking adventure that could never be told before. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad had more creatures and set pieces than any of Harryhausen's previous works, and yet he somehow managed to deliver some of his best work. The 1960s continued the giant monster trend. However, most of these efforts were made on low budgets and often lacked both the imagination and dedication of their predecessors. 1961 saw the UK produce its own knockoffs of King Kong and Godzilla in the form of 1961's Konga and Gorgo. It was also around this time that King Kong stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien attempted to revive the big screen's most beloved ape. O'Brien conceived of a story called King Kong vs. Prometheus, where Kong would battle a giant Frankenstein monster. O'Brien took the concept to producer John Beck, who behind O'Brien's back and without his knowledge took the project to Toho Studios in Japan to produce the film, replacing the giant Frankenstein monster with the king of the monsters, Godzilla. King Kong vs. Godzilla was a gargantuan success, both in Japan and overseas. With the success of the film, Toho decided to have Godzilla fight another famous monster, This time it was Toho's very own giant butterfly, Mothra. For the next decade, Toho would produce a Godzilla film almost every year, having Godzilla fight new monsters, as well as having him team up with existing monsters from previous films. Godzilla had gone from being a menace to humanity to a savior. Various American distributors would have their pick of these films, which would often be recut and given new titles. However, most of the time they were more concerned with what they thought would sell, rather than if it would make logical sense to the film itself. 1967 would also see the brief return of King Kong in King Kong Escapes, where Kong would do battle with a mechanical version of himself. The popularity of Godzilla would bring in many various imitators, the most notable of which was the giant flying, fire-breathing turtle and hero of all children, Gamera. Much like Godzilla, Gamera would go on to have his own series of films, often being pitted against various weird creatures. But while most filmmakers turned out these low-budget efforts, Ray Harryhausen continued to amaze audiences with his incredible stop-motion creations, starting with 1961's Mysterious Island.
Starring Michael Craig, who triggers the screen's most thrilling escape. Gary Merrill as a war correspondent. Joan Greenwood, shipwrecked on the mysterious island. And in this story of survival, Michael Callan and Beth Rogan.
Come on.
What's it doing?
I don't know.
Sealing us in.
Also starring Herbert Lom as the mysterious Captain Nemo and his fabulous submarine, the Nautilus.
Aren't we able to do anything to save ourselves?
There's nothing that can be done.
Super Dynamation, newest and greatest screen process, astonishes the eye with such scenes as the fight to the death with a prehistoric devilfish, the discovery and destruction of an underwater city, Mysterious Island, photograph on land, under the sea, and in the air. Truly a first in motion pictures.
Having had previous success with Sinbad, for his next film Harryhausen turned to Greek mythology for what many consider his best film, Jason and the Argonauts.
Now, from the makers of Sinbad, Columbia Pictures presents Jason and the Argonauts, the mightiest band of warriors the world has ever known.
Turn back, Jason! We're trapped!
Sailing to the ends of the earth, battling against an incredible number of obstacles.
Where will you find this miracle? I have heard there is a tree at the end of the world, with a fleece of gold hanging in its branches.
In search of the fabulous magic golden fleece, Jason and the Argonauts, caught in the clutches of the towering bronze giant Talos, battered by treacherous falling rocks, taming vulturous harpies, facing the dreaded seven-headed Hydra, battling the merciless army of skeletons. Jason and the Argonauts.
The following year, Harryhausen embarked on his one and only outer space adventure with First Men in the Moon.
animation miracle of the screen captures the whole marvelous, miraculous story of man's first journey to the moon.
Well, it makes all other forms of power obsolete. That's where they're getting their power, from sunlight.
You will discover human ant-like creatures H.G. Wells called selenites, and giant gastropods.
Cover, run!
Fearsome moon monsters to be hunted and killed. You will encounter another world of eerie beauty and infinite mystery.
Soon others will be coming from Earth. Our galleries will be strewn with dead.
I'm the only one who holds the secret of Cavorite.
Then you and your secret will remain here on the moon.
Cavor! Cavor, this is not an audience. You're on trial. No, Bedford! No! You're convicted.
Harryhausen's next film would be a remake of the 1940s film 1 Million Years BC, which would be his only film to use both stop motion and real lizards.
See the fascinating, strange, and fearful creatures who roamed and ruled the earth 1 million years BC. The Brontosaurus, a moving mountain of flesh and bone. The pterodactyl, a flying reptile with giant teeth. The flesh-eating Allosaurus. The Triceratops, a horned dinosaur in battle with the savage Ceratosaurus. You will share the unending thrills and excitement of a world of primitive wonders, of primeval terror and savagery. You will indeed live in another world, in another time, as the centuries fall back to reveal the Earth 1 million years BC. Introducing the fabulous Raquel Welch as Loanna the Fair One. John Richardson as Tumac.
In 1969, Harryhausen would bring to the screen an unmade concept by Willis O'Brien with The Valley of Gwangi.
Get Spears!
The 1970s would see Harryhausen return to the world of Mid-Eastern mythology with two new Sinbad stories, the first of which was The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
See the sorcerer of the black arts, the gold helmet faceless vizier. The death fight of the centaur on the griffin, the six-armed goddess of evil. The flying homunculus. The savage siren on a rampage. The duel with the vanishing sorcerer. The one-eyed centaur.
Following the Golden Voyage was Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger.
Sorceress, bring life to the all-powerful Minotaur.
Eat with the power as only I command you.
See Sinbad battle the saber-toothed tiger, guardian of the secret shrine. Join Sinbad, the greatest of all adventurers, in his biggest adventure of all. Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger.
The 1970s once again saw a change in the films that were produced. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho would forever change the way films were made. This time, the movie monster was a real man. After the film's release, the fictional monsters of the past were suddenly no longer as scary as they used to be. And the next decade continued the trend of pushing the boundaries of what was possible and acceptable. These groundbreaking and incredibly successful films saw the world of cinema enter a bold and exciting new era. And the old monster movie filmmakers of the past struggled to keep up. Even in Japan, Toho Studios had stopped making Godzilla films. Then, in 1976, famed producer Dino De Laurentiis attempted to revive one of the big screen's most iconic monsters, King Kong. This time, it was proposed that a giant life-size, fully animatronic King Kong would be used for the film, but unfortunately the giant Kong would only work half of the time, and even then it was less than impressive. Most of the film ended up using Japan's technique of a man in a gorilla costume. In this case, it was makeup effects artist Rick Baker. The film was a moderate success, even though many were disappointed by the lack of landmark special effects that had previously been promised. With the continuous decline of giant monster movies and the rise of modern blockbusters, horror slashers, and action-adventure cartoons, the marketplace no longer craved these larger-than-life creations. Even the godfather of giant monster movies himself, Ray Harryhausen, decided it was time to retire, and 1981 saw the release of his final film, Clash of the Titans. While many had hoped it would be a comeback for Harryhausen himself, it was a swan song. Then, in 1984, Toho Studios, 9 years after the last film, revived the King of the Monsters in Return of Godzilla. The film was a return to form for Godzilla, ignoring the events of previous films, only being a direct sequel to the original film, bringing back the more darker tones and heavier themes. Even Godzilla himself was made to look more menacing than ever before, having an animatronic head for close-ups. The miniature cities were also more larger and defined than ever before. Godzilla was once again a destructive force of nature. Much like before, additional scenes were filmed for the American version, once again adding in Raymond Burr. While Godzilla was able to make a triumphant return, the attempt made by Dino De Laurentiis to bring back King Kong was not as successful. 1986 saw the release of King Kong Lives, a direct sequel to the 1976 remake. The film saw Kong waking up from a coma after 10 years. Being a sequel released to a film 10 years prior, as well as the previous film already being considered a lackluster remake by many, King Kong Lives was a massive box office flop. However, that same year Universal Studios also revived the giant ape, not for the screen, but rather in real life, in the form of the King Kong Encounter at Universal Studios Hollywood. As part of the then studio tour, guests would come face to face with a giant fully animatronic working Kong, something the 1976 film had failed to do 10 years earlier. Meanwhile, back in Japan, Toho Studios continued Godzilla's rampage with the long-awaited sequel, Godzilla vs. Biollante. This time, Godzilla was once again more lifelike than ever before. With all the kinks in the effects worked out, Toho decided once again to start doing a Godzilla film once a year. This time with an ongoing continuity. Unlike before, this Godzilla stayed more or less a force of nature, while also saving the world from both new monsters and old monsters from previous films. With the effects being better than ever, this new era of Godzilla was incredibly successful. Even Godzilla's counterpart, Gamera, was given a new series of films that were also much darker in tone than previous outings. But then, in 1995, the now referred to Heisei era of Godzilla came to an end, with Godzilla vs. Destroyer. This time, Toho decided to kill off their most beloved monster. Godzilla had become such an iconic figure in Japan that despite being a fictional character, his death actually made news headlines. But just like before, the return of Godzilla was inevitable. But while giant monsters reigned supreme in Japan, Hollywood studios would continue to make new creature features, for which the best ones would not be recognized until years later. But then, that all changed in 1993 with what would be the biggest impact to the genre since the original King Kong, Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was to the 1990s generation what King Kong was to the 30s, a peek into the future of special effects films, Thanks to effects creator Stan Winston, the film featured more realistic animatronics than ever before. However, Steven Spielberg soon realized that although the animatronics would work perfectly for close-ups, another method would be needed for the film's wide-angle shots showcasing running dinosaurs. Originally, the film was to use traditional stop-motion, with many of the most profound stop-motion animators of the time already being hired for the film. But Spielberg felt that even the best stop-motion effects would not be able to elevate the film to its full potential. Thanks to George Lucas's effects company Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects team would utilize computer-generated images, aka CGI. The final result was a mixture between Stan Winston's larger-than-life animatronics and ILM's incredible CGI. With almost every other aspect of Jurassic Park falling into place, Jurassic Park cemented itself as an all-time genre classic, as well as changing the way films were made. With Jurassic Park's massive success, the inevitable sequel was put into development with Spielberg returning to direct. The result was 1997's The Lost World Jurassic Park, which had John Hammond revealing another island called Site B, which was used to breed the dinosaurs.
I remember all those stories you told.
Oh, no, this is nothing like that. We're in a completely different situation right now.
The film almost doubled the amount of effects work from the first film, literally having 2 T-Rexes, as well as continuing the seamless branching between real animatronics and CGI effects, with the highlight of the film being the finale featuring the Tyrannosaurus' attack on San Diego, a clear homage to the older monster movies of the past. But despite the incredible effects work, The Lost World was to be nowhere near as much of a phenomenon as the first film was. But many still consider The Lost World to be a very entertaining sequel. With CGI becoming more and more commonplace, more films featuring large creatures continue to be successful. But then, in 1998, TriStar would bring the King of the Monsters back to the screen. Directing the film was Independence Day's Roland Emmerich, who made it clear to TriStar that he wasn't a fan of Godzilla, but TriStar was still able to convince him to do the film. The film used Jurassic Park's template by using both practical effects and CGI. It was nowhere near as successful that the studio had hoped. Many fans were disappointed that the film had more in common with Jurassic Park than Godzilla. Many also consider it to be a much better remake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms than Godzilla. The film did, however, receive an animated spin-off which had much more in common with Toho's Godzilla films. The series was ironically simultaneously broadcast against a new King Kong animated series also on at the time. 1998 also saw Disney produce a remake of Mighty Joe Young, which primarily featured an incredible new gorilla suit made by Rick Baker. With some scenes being CGI, the film was considered by many as a decent remake. But the film was ultimately a box office flop, with many blaming its low earnings on the previous disappointment from TriStar's Godzilla. However, none were more dissatisfied than Godzilla's owners Toho, who immediately began producing a new Godzilla film once a year. Unlike the Heisei era, the Millennium era of Godzilla were primarily standalone stories. For the effects, Toho decided to go back to basics with the now traditional man in a rubber suit stomping around a good old miniature city. And it came to a climax with 2004's Godzilla Final Wars, which featured almost all of Toho's other monsters coming back one last time. 2001 would see the long-awaited third chapter of Jurassic Park hit the screens. This time, Steven Spielberg would take a back seat as producer, with Jumanji director Joe Johnston taking over. With only a few highlight scenes, the film was unfortunately a letdown for both the studio and audiences, putting the franchise to sleep for the next 15 years. And according to many of the cast and crew, Jurassic Park 3 at no point during the production had an actual finished script, from beginning to end. Then, in 2005, after almost 20 years, the eighth wonder of the world returned to the big screen in Peter Jackson's epic remake of King Kong. With the original film having made a massive influence on him, Peter Jackson set out to make the most faithful reimagining of Kong possible. The film was originally supposed to be made several years earlier, but Universal pulled the plug after the disappointment of TriStar's Godzilla and Disney's Mighty Joe Young. But after the success of Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, the film resumed. With a budget of over $200 million, it was the biggest undertaking the studio had ever done. Wanting to share the film's progress with other Kong fans, Jackson decided to document and share the production progress in a series of production diaries released online during the filming process, something that is unprecedented for a film that size even today. Upon release, the film was a critical and financial success, even winning 3 Academy Awards, and is considered by many to be one of the greatest remakes of all time. With an over 3-hour runtime, some feel that the film is overbloated, but for others it couldn't be long enough. Jackson also brought Kong back to the Universal Studios tour, in the form of King Kong 360 3D, a new interactive simulator which brings guests into the world of Skull Island. The film also spun off an incredibly successful video game adaptation. With King Kong's success, more big-budget studio films would continue to utilize CGI and bring forth more larger-than-life creatures. But then, the trio of writer Drew Goddard, producer J.J. Abrams, and director Matt Reeves would combine efforts to create one of the most unique and original films in the genre. The result was the 2008 film Cloverfield, which follows a group of friends as they try to navigate through a terror-stricken New York City. The film geniusly blends the found footage genre made popular by films such as The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, with the traditional giant monster formula. Combined with its elusive marketing campaign, Cloverfield became a cultural phenomenon, and one of the most celebrated films in the genre. But surprisingly, Cloverfield would hardly receive any direct imitators, the closest example being the 2010 Norwegian film Troll Hunter. That same year, Legendary Pictures unleashed a modern take on Clash of the Titans. which was a box office smash, leading to a sequel in 2012 called Wrath of the Titans. But this would only be the beginning of Legendary's monster endeavors. The following year saw the release of Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim. With the success of films like Clash of the Titans and Pacific Rim, Legendary decided to go bigger, reviving the King of the Monsters after 10 years. Unlike TriStar's Godzilla, Legendary's take was much more faithful to the original films, with director Gareth Edwards especially wanting to pay homage to the original 1954 film, and tonally being much more serious and darker. Edwards also took many cues from Cloverfield, with the majority of the film focusing on the human perspective, with various low angles making the monsters look larger than ever. And just like before, Toho would be inspired to do their own new version of Godzilla in the form of 2016's Shin Godzilla, which boldly reinvented the character to be more terrifying than ever before. Legendary Pictures would also be responsible for bringing back Jurassic Park in the incredibly successful Jurassic World, which is the highest grossing film under the Universal Pictures banner to date. With the Marvel Cinematic Universe continuing to thrive, as well as the shared universe concept in films becoming more and more popular, Legendary decided to make Godzilla be the first chapter in their shared monsterverse. An interconnected series of films revolving around giant monsters, with the second chapter in 2017, Kong Skull Island. The reign of the monsters then continued in 2019 with the newly Godzilla King of the Monsters, which brought Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah back to the screen, looking better than ever. But then the Monsterverse came to a culmination in the long-awaited rematch of Godzilla and Kong, which came to the screen in 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong. And despite a global pandemic, Godzilla vs. Kong was still able to be a box office success, showing that these titans are more popular than ever. The last decade has had the most amount of giant monsters since the golden age of the 1950s. What exciting new monsters will the next decade bring us? And what monsters from the past could we see return? One thing is for sure. These titans of destruction aren't going anywhere.